Ella, Dr. Jester, wanted to go over some of your items on your essay for radical Islam. First of all, the point of this paper is to discuss a notable individual, such as Osama bin Laden, for example, or some of his underlings in the leadership structure of his terrorism organization. A group, for example, Al Qaeda or ISIS in Iraq, or the Syrian terrorist, or even the Palestinian Liberation Organization that's been active since the 70s and 80s. So, any individual or group who led or influenced seminal events in the history of radical Islam in the 20th century, or a notable singular seminal event, such as 9/11, those types of things. So something that really stands out as having initiated some terrorist act or an organization that influenced that. Now, we get to your paper, and first of all, I thank you for the effort here. Some of the things I need to talk to you about, though, anytime you're writing for an individual, and I hope my comments here will help you, and that is the intent. It's not intended to by any means crush your spirit, but help you to be able to write better. You've always got to recognize you're writing for an audience. Now, there's an imaginary audience. I represent that audience, but this imaginary audience needs to be informed. That's what you're doing. You're informing them about this event or this notable group or this terrorist who masterminded all these things and how they are influencing politics and democracy and all those things. So that's what you want to be talking about. And one of the first things I note here is your whole paragraph here is flush. It should be flush left. It is centered text. In the body of your paper, you'll always want to make sure it's flush left like that, so that everything's on the left rather than centered like the heading is centered. Headings need to be centered. The body of your paper is always flush left. Now, as I'm reading through this, you tell us you're going to discuss notable individuals or groups that led or influenced seminal events. That's great. Life-changing events, you say, good. But then we get to this statement that I've highlighted in red, and this throws the reading audience completely off on what the subject is. It says, we will discuss a nation that has been productive in a particular field of accomplishments for humanity. So that immediately makes me think that you're going to talk about someone who did something great or a nation that has produced all these Nobel Prize winners rather than radical Islam. So that throws the reader off as far as the content of your document. So make sure your subject is clear. This is what your subject is. And then you need a thesis statement that describes what you're going to say about that subject. So here I'm unsure as your reader about what your subject is. Fruitful seminal ideas, well, that's positive. It goes right along with this previous statement I've highlighted in red. So I'm thinking positive thoughts. Down here, you shift to a heading that says radical Islam in Europe. So I'm expecting, okay, the subject is going to go to radical Islam, and what's she going to say about that? But actually, you don't ever talk about Islam in Europe. You're just talking about Islam in general. But you start out talking about democracy. So again, that's a side trail that's not focused on your subject. So your whole paper is lacking this specific focus. You eventually get to a discussion of Islamic fundamentalism, and that's good. But you don't give an example of Islamic fundamentalism. So what you need is a clear subject on Islamic fundamentalism that you state in the very beginning in your introduction, provide a thesis about what you're going to say about Islamic fundamentalism, how that's come to be, what caused it, what are some of the actions that has resulted from Islamic fundamentalism, terrorism, for example, train bombings, airplanes being shot out of the sky, those types of things, but you do not. Then you really throw your reader off by this statement, which I'll be honest with you, I'm having trouble with the logic of this, how religiously some Muslims adhere to Buddhism. that would make them non-Muslims and Buddhist instead. So that's kind of an incoherent statement. Make sure when you're writing your paper that everything you say does make sense, logical sense. Now, in your mind, I'm sure it does. And as you're writing, I do the same thing. I write something and then later on look at it and say, what did I mean by that? I thought I understood what that meant. Or sometimes I think I know what that means, but it confuses the reader. And the point is, we want to write with clarity and purpose and logical development so that the reader understands. We have to make that as easy for the reader to understand as possible. So there's a logical flow here. Another thing you've got going on is this right here. You've got two types of documentation of sources. You've got the parenthetical, which is APA. That's what you did in your undergraduate work. In graduate work, we're now doing the footnoting only. We don't mix the two. So this is a basic issue that you've got throughout that you need to correct in future submissions of papers. This also is, again, if you'll notice this is centered text, does not need to be centered. This also needs to be corrected right here. Just the way I did that. That'll show you how to format that. We go on down, more centered text. For example, continuing on with the group and individuals from the Islamic fundamentalism, you've got Bill, somebody explains. Now, parentheses indicate something that's not part of the main sentence, but it is additional information. So anything you put in parentheses, a reader would not actually say that out loud. For example, imagine reading out loud. Continuing on with the group and individuals from the Islamic fundamentalism explains the Muslim fundamentalists begin. So I'm not going to read that. That's not part of what I read. So when you put parentheses around something, the reader is not going to read that. It's only for reference purposes. So you're not going to want to say that. You're going to want to say Bill so-and-so explains the Muslim fundamentalists begin with a radical revivalist named Wahhabi, or the Salafi movement, and Muhammad ibn Abd al-Wahhab. And I don't know what this means. What is that? That page numbers, is those a time frame for years? You've got those in parentheses again, so it's not part of your main sentence. So you need to take the parentheses out. Make it part of your main sentence. And you need to let them know that is a time frame, a period of time in the years 1703 to 1792. This right here needs to be deleted. And when you say a person's name in the sentence, you're not going to go first name after the last name and then a year. That's the old style of documentation. So you want to make sure that you get that corrected in future renditions of your papers. One final thing to note. In addition, I have corrected this for you to show you how your sources need to be correctly formatted in the bibliography or reference section. So take note of that. First line is flush left. Second and subsequent lines are always indented, half a space. Okay? If you have any questions, let me know. I appreciate your efforts here, and hopefully some of these comments will be healthy criticisms that you'll see as correctives for future reference. Okay? Thanks.